Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be discussing the ways we can significantly enhance the quality and effectiveness of coaches in a sub-elite tennis setting. This will be done by drawing on contemporary literature on pedagogical approaches to learning. We will attempt to describe, explain and close the theory to practice gap within coaching in tennis and discuss some recommendations. The topics that will be covered in today's presentation will be learning environments, coach-athlete relationships and motivation in coaching. We will investigate the practical reflections of the theories and then offer an independent insight into how they can be applied in the real world. We will finish with an evaluation of my personal coaching philosophy and an analysis of how the academic theories can support future coaching practices. The primary target audience for this lecture is sub-elite coaches within tennis, aimed at University Bucks coaches. The discussion may help coaches by enabling them to deliver sessions with a different approach and having another key to unlock players' potential. Because players learn in different ways, and by understanding different approaches to learning, we may be able to develop them further. And firstly, to understand the relevance of this discussion, we must understand what the theory to practice gap is. And it's described by Keegan et al. In 2017 as the differences between the research that is conducted versus what is actually helpful when utilizing it in a sporting context. The gap exists because to become competent in both research and as a practitioner, it requires considerable training and time, and different methods and aims are often led to researchers and practitioners working separately on the same idea without communicating ideas. And coaching literature is always evolving, and coaches must be able to access this information to be able to utilize it properly. First thing we are going to look at is learning environments. There are numerous theories and pedagogical ideas on designing and implementing effective training programs, but the theory that we're going to focus on today is the constraints-led approach, which is a coaching method based on the principles of non-linear pedagogy. In this, the coach manipulates certain constraints where different information is then presented to the learner, which results in the learner being challenged to find their own solutions. Constraints that can be manipulated are the performer, which is skill and physical ability, as well as effective behavior, motivation and emotions. The environment, which relates to the culture, expectations and values. And also the task, which involves changing rules, equipment, playing areas and players. Without fully understanding the concept of the constraints-led approach, the practice activities may look very similar to other methodologies, but the important thing here is that the approach does not necessarily concern the methodology, and the difference is in the underlying philosophy which shapes the methodology and can be used in a broader training context. We're going to have a quick example of a constraints-led approach in action here. So if you just have a quick look at this, I'm just going to mute it. As you can see, the coach is working with the player to take the ball early on the rise so that they can take time away from the opponent. And play aggressively. So instead of using a more traditional cognitive coaching method, where the coach may have instructed the player to execute moves step by step, is used the constraints to the performer and to the task, directing the player that they must stay within the court to strike the ball, which is obviously being fed by the coach into a fairly deep position you can see here. And you know, to hit a proficient shot, the player must adapt the swing to become shorter. And it allows the player to think much more for themselves, leading to greater adaptation. And the athlete also learns to problem solve and self-organize, which is an important skill in tennis, as most of the time you're playing on your own and you must figure things out for yourself, physically, technically, tactically and psychologically. And the athletes are not able to do this when information is always just being fed to them in isolated exercises. We're also going to have a quick look at another example here. This time it's on the serve. It's quite a quick one. So pre-intervention, You can see that his legs there, he's not using enough drive, which will help him generate power. So the constraint here, you can see that they've used a section of cones that the player naturally, instinctively has to then jump over while he's serving. And then we see the post intervention. He's already got a much bigger leg drive and jump, which is going to add more power to his serve. So that's another example there. Just jump back to the presentation. For us to achieve this properly, research suggests we must make use of applied games rather than static drills with infrequent instruction and demonstration. We've got to use random non-linear practice instead of block practice, giving less feedback than using other methods. And as a coach, placing the overall focus on the active learning, using games instead of drills, constraints instead of verbal instruction, and variability instead of repetition. So if you look at it like it's giving your players a map rather than just telling them where to go, so they can learn for themselves. The next theme we're going to look at is coach-athlete relationships. It's been described as being crucial to the optimal functioning of an athlete, and there is a plethora of research to support that a healthy relationship between a coach and player, including mutual respect and trust, hugely important for effective and successful relationships. Constructing a healthy coach-athlete relationship is therefore very important, and is theorized in the coach-athlete interactions, which is the 3Cs+1 model by Jowett. And they stand for closeness, which is reflecting an interpersonal mutual feeling, creating an effective bond. Commitment, which is having similar beliefs, values, interests, and support for one another. And complementarity, which is cooperation and joint leadership, as well as co-orientation, which relates to the trust and level of independence in terms of understanding. And Sophia Jowett argues that coaches and athlete are locked into a two-person relationship, and its quality can offer a measure of coaching and its effectiveness. Research by Jowett in 2009 found that the 3Cs are rated as important in high-level athletes with their coach, and this suggests that the coach-athlete relationship does play a pivotal role in establishing and maintaining performance in a sporting environment. And once constructed, the coach-athlete relationship needs to be maintained and continually developed. The Compass model, which you can see here by Rind and Jowett, have been developed and suggests that the use of 7 relationship maintenance components, including conflict management, openness, motivational, preventative, assurance, support, and social networks. And during this study, all 7 components were discussed without prompting by most of the athletes and coaches, hence the development of the model. And in this research, it displays the emphasis on the importance of being able to comfortably cooperate alongside a coach in the 7 areas. And as a coach, having a relationship outside of tennis, keeping sessions enjoyable, dealing with any conflict in a proactive manner, allows a relationship to be successfully maintained. And unless people use effective maintenance strategies, the relationships will ultimately weaken and end. And moving on to motivation, and motivational climate ties in very closely alongside the coach-athlete relationship, and is another prevalent theme in the discussion of evolving coaching practices. The dominant theory on motivation in coaching is the achievement goal theory by Nichols. The achievement goal theory suggests that there are 2 major patterns in athletes' responses to learning and how they judge their own ability. So they either have a maladaptive, helpless response or a more adaptive mastery approach. And theory makes basic assumptions about humans, saying that they are intentional and goal-directed organisms, with the overriding goal of our actions being to demonstrate competence. However, each individual's criteria to demonstrate that competence does differ. And individuals can fluctuate their state of involvement directed toward task or ego-orientated goals, where they can be more or less task and or ego involved at any point during the task. And a task involving coach indicates that they place value on the athlete's hard work and has a strong emphasis on learning and working together to do their best through improvement relative to self-reference criteria. And in a completely opposite approach, climate is created by an ego-oriented coach is focused on outperforming competitors and teammates with punishment for mistakes and differential treatment of players based on the level of ability. And these different avenues can be influenced by the coach and their behaviours, the languages, the structure and the feedback, which can all vary depending on the goals of the coach, in turn affecting the athlete. And using a mastery coaching method within a university setting may be more beneficial than using performance and ego goals. Although tennis is an individual sport, most competitions at university level are organised in a team, meaning all players within the group are required to play their role. The environment where players feel that they're fighting against each other in the squad may affect performance in the long run by affecting the team dynamics. Instead, a focus on improving as a team, working together and making each other better for the benefit of the overall group may lead to greater success. And adopting a performance-oriented climate might be a benefit to some players, but as a group and for the team, it is more likely to have a maladaptive consequence rather than recruit positive ones. And performance is often the goal that is focused on, especially within tennis, where results do mean a lot. And due to competition for places on the team, players are extremely expendable and can be replaced if they're not performing in training and competition. But research has shown that a task involving climate and a task approach goal are key elements in producing enjoyable experiences, even within young athletes, and found that it showed the importance of emphasizing trying hard, personal development, learning and mastery and cooperation. And coaches must understand that every player will respond differently to specific training conditions, and that is important to tailor motivational climates to individuals rather than the group as a whole. And this should enable coaches to gain greatest benefits from all players. Players' perceived competence can improve, as well as self-esteem, levels of enjoyment and reduction in stress and anxiety. Coming to the end of the presentation, I'm going to round up everything that we've discussed and conclude with some recommendations. Firstly, we discussed how using a constraints-led approach learning environment can benefit athletes over possibly more traditional approach, allowing them to develop as learners rather than teaching them in a linear way, allowing them to take ownership of their learning and become problem solvers, which will not only benefit their tennis over the long run, but their life in general. And the approach is one that is fairly new to me, but I do like the idea that players are learning skills that can be directly implemented in competition that may help them gain a small advantage. We then had a look at coach-athlete relationships and motivation, and the link between a coach and an athlete in relation to motivation does play a great role in allowing an athlete to feel confident, competent and comfortable. We discussed the achievement goal theory that suggests that a coach can help create a motivational climate that is either mastery or ego. And we learned that focusing on creating a mastery climate allowed athletes to develop with an emphasis on learning rather than one based off performance. And research shows that a coaching environment that is adaptive and mastery transfers to an increase in motivation and performance. So whereas a climate based on focus on performance will often become toxic and lead to the breakdown in the coach-athlete relationship as well. Motivation can be largely dependent on the perception of competence by an athlete, but also on the pedagogical and sociological aspects as well. And to create a climate orientated around task rather than ego requires togetherness between a coach and athlete and a bond that revolves around the 3 C's. It also must be maintained, that bond, to continue a flourishing climate, and a good relationship must continue out of the training environment to achieve this. And motivation levels will be affected by the coach's behaviour and techniques alongside attitude, which is ultimately reflected and transcribed by the player. And the quote here at the end really encapsulates my philosophy regarding tennis coaching. So it says, the glory is being happy. The glory is not winning here or winning there. The glory is enjoying practicing, enjoy every day, enjoying to work hard, trying to be better player than before. And I think it really comes down to the fun and the enjoyment and the creation of an atmosphere where players are able to thrive in an effective learning environment, and that is fundamentally established by the coach and their methods. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.